The legendary bassist and singer Glenn Hughes is finally speaking quietly about a terrible and troubled relationship with Gary Moore, a subject long buried beneath the weight of rock history, despite the fact that his deep voice used to fill arenas. Moore has long been venerated by fans as a deity of guitar, a man whose deft fingers could evoke intense feelings with each strumming chord. Z. But there was a far darker truth lurking beneath the glittering solos and scorching blues chords. A life of suffering, broken relationships, and an unending stream of strife that accompanied him to his final resting place. Moore had an impressively brilliant career, but it was also a precarious one, plagued by his own intransigence. He was a perfectionist who frequently caused mayhem in his pursuit of excellence. Hughes felt that their time together lacked the magical musical harmony that their admirers may have imagined. A battlefield it was. Two natural disasters, each with its own unique set of strengths and weaknesses, smashed into each other in ways that have never been fully healed. As two formidable musicians who shared a passion for rock and blues, Hughes, and in the early 1920s appeared to be a perfect fit. However, their collaboration was a hotbed of expectations and ego clashes behind the scenes. Hughes' carefree, improvisatory style contrasted with Moore's dogged quest of perfection. Consider how tense those recording sessions were. Moore, who painstakingly crafted every note, insisted on accuracy, while Hughes, whose motivation came from feeling and being spontaneous, advocated for unfiltered vitality and character. Despite having complementary artistic goals at the outset, they quickly began to diverge. Substance abuse, which Hughes openly battled, only served to inflame the situation. Without hesitating, Moore became more and more irritated by Hughes' unreliability. Moore, who was always obsessed with perfection, finally snapped when Hughes' personal problems started to show in his performances. They broke up. A path of animosity and unsaid accusations was left behind by the acrimonious divorce. It was just another difficult chapter in Hughes's life, full of hardship. It was simply the latest in Moore's string of failed partnerships. Moore had disagreements with other musicians besides Hughes. Discord arose in the late 1970s as Moore's relationship with the magnetic lead singer of Thin Lizzy, Phil Lynott, went on and off. Moore possessed virtuoso guitar skills that enriched the band's sound when he joined at a pivotal point. But Lynott's easygoing, party-loving lifestyle frequently clashed with Moore's demanding nature and high standards. There was strong musical chemistry between the two, but their bond was marred by animosity. A combination of Moore's inability to cope with Thin Lizzy's wild lifestyle and his increasing unease with Lynott's spiraling drug usage caused heated disagreements. After an initial period of mutual regard, Moore quit the band in the middle of 1979, leaving Lynott and the other members to pick up the pieces after their strained relationship. One of rock's most tragic schisms persisted for a long time after they broke up. Upon Lynott's tragic death in 1986, Moore conveyed remorse about their unfinished business. In an effort to reignite his magic in the 1990s, Moore formed the brief supergroup BBM with rock greats Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. With Bruce's rumbling bass lines, Baker's ferocious drumming, and Moore's blazing guitar work, the lineup seemed perfect on paper. It was, however, a time bomb waiting to go off. The long-simmering animosities between Cream veterans Bruce and Baker were exacerbated by Moore's imposing presence. Disputes arose at every rehearsal due to competing visions, inflated egos, and the impact of their respective legacies. While Moore's no-nonsense approach and Bruce's infamous biting tongue frequently clashed, Baker's erratic behavior further exacerbated an already delicate situation. Behind the scenes, the band's problems were evident, yet they only managed to release one album, Around the Next Dream. The project eventually crumbled due to the internal strife, which began when Moore became frustrated with the lack of discipline and unity and escalated into furious confrontations. Moore's flamboyant character transposed into his personal relationships in the same way it did in his professional life. Control concerns, perfectionism, and a lack of flexibility marred his marriages as much as his professional life. Because he was so devoted to his music, he barely had time for his first wife and children, and their marriage ended in tragedy. His second marriage had its ups and downs, but his unpredictable personality and frequent touring put a strain on both of them. Being raised in the shadow of their father's dogged quest of musical glory, his children frequently felt the pain of his absence. Envision a youthful Moore, guitar in hand at all times, blissfully unaware of the passing of time as he forwent birthdays and family get-togethers to focus on his art. It would take years for the wounds caused by his imbalance to heal, no matter how much he loved them. While Hughes' struggles with alcoholism and mental illness received more media attention, Moore also battled his own problems and felt increasingly alone as his reputation grew. He felt increasing pressure to maintain his stellar reputation as his career developed. The music that used to make him happy became both his refuge and his jail, and nights that should have been filled with revelry became lonely battles with the bottle. As the years of overindulgence wore him down, his mental health began to suffer, and he began to have spells of depression. His co-workers and friends frequently characterized him as someone who was burdened by his own high standards and who was never able to achieve the serenity he craved. Gary Moore felt increasingly alone as the years went by in a world that had formerly adored him but had now forgotten about him. The unrelenting zeal that had propelled him to fame, the primal ferocity that had sparked his musical career, started to fade. Once bursting with energy, the albums now weighed heavily with introspection and sadness, and the crowds got fewer and less frequent. The arena, once his refuge and battleground, was no longer a haven from the monsters that had pursued him for years. It turned out to be a spectral reminder of his past self, something he would never be able to shake. Just think of the difference. Moore, who was once a charismatic performer who wowed crowds with his electrifying guitar solos, now spends his days alone in dressing rooms, staring at his reflection and trying to remember who he was. He was trapped by the demons of his past, even as his once thriving profession ground to a halt, cutting him off from a world that lived on innovation. Amidst the gloom of self-remorse and isolation, his once brilliant relationships with friends and family began to erode. Moore never stepped away entirely, even though the pace was slowing. Something had changed, though, and he kept recording and touring. His once ferocious sound has subsided, giving way to a thoughtful, almost melancholy quality. Even though he gave his all to the blues, the battle was now an integral part of his life. In addition to trying to reassert his position in rock history, every concert served as a call for companionship and purpose beyond the existence he had fashioned around his guitar. But music seemed to recede the more he clung to it for comfort. The unavoidable occurred in 2011. After years of performing in front of loving fans and a supportive rock environment, Moore's heart gave out while alone in a hotel room in Spain. An assassin's death was as silent as it was terrible. The guy had lived his life loudly, pushing himself to the boundaries of his craft and soul. There was no encore, no yelling fans, only the icy stillness of a life that had gone out too quickly and too violently. Although his passing came as a shock to the music industry, his loved ones understood that it had been inevitable. Little did anybody know that Moore was battling an invisible enemy: loneliness, regret, and an endless quest for meaning in life. There could be no denying his legacy, although it was filled with uncertainties. Were there other possibilities? Imagine if he had accepted his own demons. Imagine if he had given himself permission to savor the fruits of his labor. As the tributes came in, they depicted a man who had dedicated himself fully to his work, but maybe never enough to himself. Moore's life was an illustrative tale of genius and hardship, success and failure. Losing him was more than simply losing a talented musician. It was like closing a chapter in a book full of unfinished business, unsolved problems, and an enduring need for meaning in life beyond music. Gary Moore was a man burdened by the rubble of his own dogged quest of perfection, yet his legacy is a chilling paradox. He was an artist of tremendous brilliance. The unfiltered strength and raw emotion of his guitar notes conveyed something beyond what words could convey. But beneath that talent was a troubled soul, one who took refuge in music but battled relentlessly with the interpersonal relationships that ought to have anchored him. Similar to his fiery solos, Moore's relationships were frequently strained, emotional, and unsatisfying. Disputes with other artists like Glenn Hughes, Phil Lynott, and Jack Bruce, which became famous, were more than just that, disputes. These clashes of vision and ego were deep and emotionally heated. Whether it was Hughes's carefree attitude to music clashing with Moore's exactitude or Linus's disorderly rock and roll lifestyle clashing with his more regimented discipline, Moore was a man who demanded a lot from himself and expected the same from those around him. As a result, Moore's relationships with his peers were frequently characterized by friction rather than friendship. Wars of identity, waged over artistic integrity and an inflexible need for control, these disputes were more than simply creative differences. Imagine the performer who, behind the scenes, fought against feelings of isolation and unhappiness, yet soared on stage with deft fingerwork that wove complex melodies. It appeared that Moore was never satisfied with mere success. He became even more insatiable for more with each successful record and sold-out performance. The ideal music, the ideal band, and the ideal occasion were perpetually eluding him, yet he never stopped fighting for them. And in his pursuit, he created a wake of shattered relationships, missed chances, and hurts that would never fully heal. While his music has touched and inspired countless people, his life serves as a cautionary tale, a sobering reminder that achieving greatness isn't always easy. Beyond the spotlights of the stage, the emotional toll of Moore's unwavering character weighed him down like an unrelenting shadow, as reflected in every chord and line. You couldn't deny his genius. His impact is immense, but he lived to show that no one is immune to their own demons, no matter how talented they are. Every one of his devoted listeners who finds heartfelt expression in his music also knows who he is. Even though he was brilliant, the man yearned for something more substantial than the superficial acclaim of his audience. A sad assessment of a life spent pursuing perfection at the cost of personal happiness. Gary Moore's legacy is ultimately more than just a celebration of his creativity. I think that's the saddest note of all.